Good afternoon, dear colleagues. We give the floor to the Speaker of the Presidential Administration on the issues of ATO, Colonel Andriy Lysenko. Good afternoon, esteemed colleagues. We're going to offer your attention the major events which took place in the ATO zone for the last 24 hours. The Lugansk segment, the most unquiet situation, is preserved in the near border Stanично-Lugansky district. Yesterday, after the dawn, the enemy carried out a very powerful mortar artillery shelling of Ukrainian positions near Boletene. They fired from 3 different sides on the opposite side of the opposite bank of Seversky Donetsk River. At night, the enemy actually shelled using mortars and grenade launchers in Lugansk, as a result of which they damaged 3 houses and the gas pipeline. Two firings took place between militants and the ATO forces near Shastya. Near the Bakhmut highway yesterday morning, the enemy twice shelled using mortars our fighting positions by our fighters who defended Nizhny. A short period fight took place in Novotoshkinsk in Zolote using a very dense town planning. The enemy twice shelled Ukrainian enemies at the front section between Popasna and Troitsky. It was more or less quiet situation. The enemy in the Svetlodarsk arc situation, the situation was quiet. There was no heavy weapon use in this area. Near Gorlivka, the enemy concentrated its activity to the north of the city, first of all near Zaitsevo. In addition to the shooting, they are shelling the Ukrainian positions of the first and the second line of defense. The militants continue to send the air saboteurs. One of the attacks of this sabotage and reconnaissance group, the ATO soldiers repelled near Semigiria. Near Novgorodsk and Avdiivka, the only point of confrontation were the suburbs of Bakhmutinko, which militants shelled using 152mm guns, which were stationed in Isunvata. The western suburbs of Donetsk remained the hottest spot of the ATO area. For the 3rd day in a row, the enemy uses the multi-rocket launchers, shelling the residential quarters of Ukrainian towns and cities. Again, damage was done to Opet and Avdiivka. To your attention, I would like to offer the photographs which were taken by the Joint Control and Coordination Center after the day before yesterday's shelling. On the line, Yosemite, Kovduk, Putilivsky, Woods, Spartak, the report, they concentrated the heavy weaponry which they use usually in dark hours of the day. At the same time, they do not dare to use the heavy weaponry during the day. The most activity of the militants was concentrated in the near the Donetsk bypass way or road. At the same time, in near Krasnogorsk and Mariinka, the situation is more or less quiet. The same can be said about the situation near Donetsk towards Mariupol. At the Mariupol segment, the enemy continues to use the tactics of shelling the Ukrainian fortifications using the heavy weaponry without being engaged in the close combat. The fire from the enemy's howitzer was carried out and mortars on the broad section of the front near Tronsk and Talakivka. They used 120mm mortars which are deployed in the Kuchavsk.
Near Starognativka, the enemy 3 times was firing at the ATO forces from 152mm guns, and in the evening they were using Grad system. I would like to remind that that was 40 missiles. Next to Pavlopol and Darlivsky, the work that the enemy's howitzers and grad systems were registered. The enemy was firing from the distance of 10-12 kilometers in the dark time of the day. At around 22 p.m., the enemy was shelling at our defense line to the east of Talakivka. Heavy weaponry of the enemy is practically at the front line that is concentrated in 3 different locations. 2 short-term episodes of violation of ceasefire by enemy were registered in Shirokino. To the south of Donetsk region, about 10 villages are constantly being shelled by the enemy from August last year. In the result of shellings and provocations, 19 peaceful citizens, including 4 children, were killed. Also, 54 persons were wounded. Many citizens left the village, but in all the villages, there are people who live and work there. During the last 24 hours, in the result of active military actions and provocations and shellings, 1 Ukrainian serviceman was killed, 6 more were wounded. Yesterday in Donetsk region, the flight of 1 drone was registered. Another register of the country of aggressor was detected at the borderline with between Khersonsky region and occupied Crimea. Mobilized military continuing the intensive training in Rivnensky test field. The servicemen learning how to counteract the enemy. The servicemen have to quickly react to extreme situation, fire from different positions, and eliminate the threat to be able to move further. Also taking into account the situation at the contact line, our artillery experts are improving their skills. First of all, shelling from missile artillery. The mobilized servicemen worked on how to take the GRAD system to the firing position. Also, modern military equipment is coming to the front line. During the year, the vehicles were renewed. Some new vehicles were added. The main test field for testing these vehicles is the ATO zone, where the equipment and the machinery is checked in the extreme conditions and during the battle. Our servicemen can give an objective assessment to the equipment and vehicles and can tell how the Ukrainian tanks, armored personnel carriers were repelling the attacks of the militants. Our servicemen visited wounded military from the zone of ATO, National Guard, servicemen from Dnipropetrovsk region visited their colleagues who are undergoing the course of rehabilitation. They thanked the wounded servicemen thanked their brothers in arms for the support and assistance. Ukrainian psychologists are providing moral and spiritual assistance to our military at the front line. The psychologists at the front line are exercising the role of the link between the servicemen and the leadership of the military. At the same time, the chaplains are providing the assistance of the pastor and are serving the services. There was the rotation of the servicemen of the armed forces of Ukraine taking place. The group of the servicemen returned to Odessa. The citizens of the city, friends and relatives were meeting the heroes by patriotic slogans and the improvised corridor of glory. Any questions, any clarifications? No questions, no clarifications. Thank you, Mr. Lysenko. Our next briefing will take place at 1 o'clock. The speaker is the Vice Prime Minister of Ukraine, the Minister of Regional Development, Construction